Brian Powell. I'm Park Superintendent, as Elizabeth said, out here in Natural Resources, Parks and Recreation. I don't think I really have time to talk about the multi-species conservation plan. Maybe we can come back to that at a future meeting. I'm happy to talk about that and the Sonora Desert Conservation Plan. But I'm going to be talking about invasive species and some of the tools and some of the challenges that we have with invasive species. I'm actually mostly going to talk about the challenges. I'll talk about a little bit tool that I worked on with some of the folks in the ITD department at the county a couple of years ago, and then I'm going to hand it off to Matt, who's going to talk about some of our data workflows now and some of the tools we're developing in this next iteration of our program, which is evolving. I'm going to share my screen and start this again. Here we go. So there we go. Okay. All right. Hopefully you can see that. Is this coming in clear for you?
I'm seeing it good, Brian.
Yeah, okay, cool. I don't understand Google Meets. This really first time I tried this, so it looks weird on my end. Okay, anyway, glad it looks good for you. So so before I kind of jump into invasive species, I just want to give everybody an overview of the land base that we manage. So we manage the Natural Resource Parks and Recreation Department, manages over 250,000 acres of land spread throughout mostly Eastern Pima County. What I'm showing here is a map of Eastern Pima County. We do have a few properties that we manage in Western Pima County, but 250,000 acres spread across over 150 named properties. And many of these properties were purchased / leased since 2005, when the voters of Pima County approved a bond measure that supported the Sonora Desert Conservation Plan and the biological goals of that plan. A few of the parks, like Tucson Mountain Park, of course, this is actually our oldest park, was established in actually 1928. Some of you may know that Saguaro National Park West was actually part of Tucson Mountain Park, but the feds took that over in 1962. We have the Colossal Cave Mountain Park here. That's older, back from the 1970s, and Cienega Creek from the 1980s. But pretty well, most of the lands you're seeing here have been purchased in the last 20 years. So we have a very large land base. So kind of put that a little bit in context as I move through this presentation. And by the way, some of these places are really remote. In fact, just yesterday, I was fortunate enough, I don't get out in the field very often, but yesterday I was fortunate enough to get out in the field and just to drive out to this part of the A7 ranches. This is in the San Pedro River Valley. Just to drive to begin our field work took over 2 hours. So these are really, some of them are really remote. So massive land base and a lot to think about. And as we get into invasive species, hopefully some of you heard the term wicked problem. These are problems that are hard to solve because of their complexity. So as it relates to invasive plant species, here I'm just talking about invasive plant species. We do have other invasive species, especially like in our region, we think about invasive aquatic species as being a significant threat. Here I'm talking about invasive plant species. So, and the number and extent of invasive species is increasing. This is AGIC. So all across Arizona, if you haven't heard of stinknet as an example of a new species that's come in the last couple of years, it got a lot of press over this winter, especially in the Phoenix area. We know that stinknet is just a good example of a problem that's just getting worse. We have a lot of limited resources to deal with this increasing problem. You saw that map, and the chances of us actually visiting a lot of these properties even once a year is challenging. And then in addition to all those other things, we also have invasive plant species pose a really interesting, not unique, but an interesting problem from a data perspective, in that you know, you have to know what species you're looking at. For example, just with stinknet, there's another invasive species that's not quite as much of a problem, but called pineapple weed. It looks a lot like stinknet. There are native species that look like stinknet. Buffalo grass is another example where there's some native species. We've actually had examples where people go in and they're feeling really good about themselves, but they're pulling out native plants thinking it's buffalo grass. So we have that problem. And to even understand the extent of our problem would require resources that would take all of the resources that we might otherwise devote to management actions. So we have a significant problem. We also, fortunately, in our region, I think, have also a good track record of citizen involvement, mostly citizen-driven efforts, especially in Tucson Mountain Park. This was started back in the what we call the Sonoran Desert Weed Whackers, started back in late 90s, and have been going strong ever since. So we've really got a lot of effort, a lot of volunteer labor. We have 3 mostly buffalo grass pulls per month in Tucson Mountain Park. So we have a good history of really identifying the problem early, getting citizen involvement to tackle the problem. These are just a couple of photographs of some of the work that we've done over the years to remove buffalo grass, and this is fountain grass in Tucson Mountain Park. So we've done some great work. We've elevated even to the Board of Supervisors levels. They're interested in what we're doing, looking to capitalize on the work that we've done. But we have a lot more to go. Just last couple of monsoons have been so great, and at the same time, they've also caused a proliferation in a lot of the invasive species that we're concerned about. Summer growing plants, particularly buffalo grass. We now have not a new, but really kind of emerging plant, an Aragrostis tick grass. So as we're looking forward to where we need to devote more resources, if we can get them, we need a better strategy. And so we're working on that right now. It's a comprehensive strategy. So what are the important species that we need to be focusing on? We have over 200 invasive plant species in Pima County. Not all of them are, a problem in that same sense. So we've identified 7 species that are going to be our high priority species. But then, where do we focus resources? What are the areas that we say, okay, these are the most important areas to treat, and why? And so we're actually moving through that process right now. And it's a really challenging process, right? Because we're saying, by saying some areas are really important, we're also saying other areas are not so important. And when you go to some of these far-flung places like I was at yesterday, they're just incredibly beautiful. And you just know that we'll just never be able to get a team out there to deal with the invasive species that we documented yesterday. So it's a challenging, one of the most challenging sort of management planning processes I've ever had to deal with, because we have to admit that we just don't have enough resources to address the problem across all the lands that we're entrusted with managing. At the same time, we're also going to use this management planning process, or this strategic planning process, to say, hey, look, if we really do care about places X, Y, and Z, here are the resources that we need in an ideal world to kind of help deal with the problem. So we're kind of moving forward with that planning process, and at the same time, we're also developing some new data tools that will help us answer some questions and ask some questions. So I just want to give you a kind of really, really brief introduction to one of the tools that we developed a few years ago. Again, this was with ITD. If you can't really tackle a problem that you don't really know the extent of, and inventories are a way for us to say, look, here's the extent of this problem within the lands that we manage. We're looking at a tool because we haven't had a comprehensive inventory. So we're looking for an efficient tool to help us identify where the problems are. So this is a screenshot of one of our sort of older technologies that were used. These are just like basically simple like points that we captured on a GPS unit and transferred into our geodatabase. I have a few polygons, but a lot of it's sort of point-based information. So in the winter of 2021, we worked on a really kind of crude, kind of rapid assessment inventory process where we took advantage, in essence, of the geography of this area. It's just very mountainous, where you can actually get a very good view of kind of large areas, and buffalo grass in particular stands out in this landscape. And you may not be able to see it too well, but the photos, it's a little bit more challenging with photographs, but you can see in the foreground there's actually, we can't really see any big patches of buffalo grass, but this is actually a very large patch of buffalo grass, which we then could use our at the time we're using Panasonic Tough Pad tablets to draw polygons and attribute those polygons to give us a sense for the extent of some of these infestations. This is one of the areas that where we mapped, and we were able to draw these polygons, like I said, using these tablets. And then we wanted to identify, you know, where is the buffalo grass, what's the percent cover, what are the estimated number of plants. And so what we were able to do is we were able to, in the red, identify infestations with those categories in particular as being important. But we also wanted to identify areas where we actually didn't see invasives. You know, a lot of times with data, we often focus on like sort of positive data, that is, you know, cells or polygons or whatever it is that actually have the thing that we're looking for. And we forget that it's also important to record it from, you know, places where we didn't find them. And there's a lot of caveats here that I don't really have time, and you may not be that interested in getting into, but, you know, it's possible in these polygons where we said there are no invasives, that there actually are a few of them, which is why we say no invasives observed, that is, we didn't see. And we're looking for large infestations here, so not sort of individual plants. So that was the extent of what we did. And here are the polygons that were mapped that have where we did not. This is Tucson Mountain Park, I should say. This is over in West Tucson. Downtown is over here. This is A Mountain and Tumamoc Hill. So downtown is over here. This is Ajo Highway here. And so we were able to really get a snapshot view. We're not able to finish the entire 20,000 acres. We did manage to map about 4,000 acres, and we then used this information actually to get 2 grants from since this project was undertaken, 2 grants from Department of Forestry and Fire Management in this area down here, what we call the kind of Robles Pass area. It's got a lot of wildland urban interface, and we were able to you know, take these data and say, look, we've got a pretty big buffalo grass problem here. We also have a lot of neighbors in this area, and we're concerned about fire, because buffalo grass, if you don't know, is a sort of thrives on fire and promotes fire in natural systems that don't otherwise have the capability of withstanding that fire. So we got a couple grants that we're now working on getting resources to address this problem. So so we're developing that management strategy. And then we're really integrating the data element, really focusing on using good quality data to justify our decisions and to also put information back out to the decision makers and the public. We using those data for grants. We're integrating our data sets and our information with other partners like Sonoran Desert Museum, City of Tucson, Saguaro National Park, etc. So we're really ramping up our invasives work, and we need to do that. But the data stuff is really important. So pretty well going to hand this over to Matt here in a second, but yeah. So we want to one of the things that's really important, actually, that thing pops up all the time in the county. One of the things we want to do is we want to be able to attribute some of our polygons where we do work. So we either do the manual treatment or we do the chemical treatment, where we want to identify how much effort did it take to do that area. So though people have been doing buffalo grass treatments for a long time, we actually don't really have a good sense for how long it takes to do those treatments. So again, kind of embedding a lot of information into our GIS, but not too much so that it's so onerous that we don't actually use the system. So there's always a balance there. So I'll hand it over to Matt to take it away. Or if you want to wait on the questions, or maybe Matt, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, let me share my screen. Whoops, that's not all right. Let's see. Can you all see that okay?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks, Brian. Yeah, he touched on it a little bit. So some of these areas might look similar, but I was going to focus on the GIS aspect of the invasives effort. Basically, GIS, what does it do? It gives us the ability to not only house the data in an enterprise format, but to visualize the data spatially and put it on a map and be able to make sense of what all that data is, especially in the context of the county's massive invasive suppression efforts that can get kind of onerous, like what Brian said. But GIS kind of helps us along and gives us a tool to use to make it a little bit more digestible through different ways. Keeping it housed in an enterprise database ensures that we can levy as many quality control checks and manage versions as necessary to keep the data accurate and secure, which is very important, especially if you're going out to A7, spending 2 hours to get there, 2 hours to get back, and however many hours out there in the sun collecting the data. You want to make sure that it's retained properly and you don't lose it along the way. And especially when we have somewhere on the order of 17,000 invasive records dating back to 2000. That's representing over 36,000 treated acres. Although the bulk of that data comes from the last 5 years or so, the stuff older than that is just as important. There's kind of three main ways that the data comes to us, served mainly through a couple of mobile apps that we use, Survey123 and Field Maps, which used to be Collector. If those of you are familiar with that, it's basically the same app, but a little more stylized and functional today. The benefit of a lot of these are that they're very easy to make in-house, and they're incredibly, the learning curve is incredibly shallow. So especially when you're thinking about using citizen scientists to collect your data, it's very easy to teach them how to use it. It's very, I mean, everybody has the computers in their pockets already. So these are all optimized for mobile use. Brian mentioned using tough pads, and I come from a biology background and doing a lot of field work, and lugging out tough pads and tough books, and that can get kind of cumbersome. And so being able to leverage the technology that almost everybody is already carrying in their pockets is a huge thing. The benefit with Survey123 over the others is that it's a little easier to understand for citizen scientists. It's very data focused and very cut and dry. The other app that we use a lot and that I kind of prefer over the others are Field Maps app. That's highly customizable, and that's a little more map based. And so it helps a lot when you're going to previous areas that have been treated and observed for 2 decades. We're able to put in all the data that we've collected over time into the apps for the field collectors to go out there, and they're able to see it and know, is this the area that we've been in, that we've treated? What did it look like in this year? And so we can tailor these apps to meet the needs of the data collectors. Again, they're very easy to implement. They're very cheap. They're a lot of fun too. And what they're aiming to do is to replace hard copy maps, which we do get occasionally. Those will still come in, or coordinate emails. I just input, I think 20 or so records that came in with just GPS points. And that's very bare bones, and it's very time consuming. It took all day to do that, which is unfortunate. That can be a huge time sink. If that's all the data that was coming in was all hard copy based, that would be a nightmare. Another drawback is that there aren't QC checks inherently built into them like we can do with our Field Maps app or our Survey 123, where we make certain fields required. You won't be able to submit a survey until you fill out these certain fields. You're just kind of at the behest of whoever collected the data with the hard copies. And if they didn't fill out a form or didn't fill out a section, then you can try and contact them. But if it's, say it's legacy data from years ago, that person might not even be alive anymore. So it's a lot easier to ensure proper practices when we use the GIS tools that we have. The basic life cycle, I can go through this pretty quickly. It's cut and dry. The user goes out in the field with the app that they like to use, or that we, let them use or ask them to use. They collect the data. Whoops. Once they're done in the field, if they have a connection, they can even upload it from the field into the cloud, where it hits ArcGIS Online, and it's available to those of us with the right permissions to take a look at. It can live there in perpetuity, or we can use ArcGIS Pro to append the data into our natural resource geodatabase. And that's what we usually do. We'll go through about once a month and check for new records that have been uploaded, give them one last QC, and then put them into our geodatabase. This map right here, Brian showed a lot of Tucson Mountain Park, and this is the same, but this is encompassing data coming in from all the different avenues since 2001 until now. It's represents over about 10,000 acres of treated areas going back to 2001. Vast majority of this is buffalo grass, but there's about 12 or so invasive species in there. That would be basically impossible to visualize all this in context without GIS capabilities. And from here, we can do a lot with this. We can either produce interpretive maps to engage with the public, say at some of the public weed pulling events. We can produce internal maps for special areas of interest to support in grant proposals or reporting efforts. We can serve this online in an interactive web map form to facilitate public outreach and interest. So a lot of good stuff that we do with GIS having to do with the invasives program here. So do you have any questions for either Brian or myself? Now's a good time.
Yeah, thank you, Matt and Brian. That was really good. So Brian, a question came to mind for either you or Matt, but probably mainly yourself. With all the lands that are currently under management, how are you prioritizing, like which areas to treat?
Yeah, so there really are there are two types of treatments that we do. One is hand pulling and one is spraying. And for hand pulling, we rely almost entirely on volunteers. So in a lot of ways, we have to kind of meet those people literally where they're at. And with as much effort as been put into Tucson Mountain Park and properties around there, we'll be focusing and continuing to focus on Tucson Mountain Park. Partly because that's such a visited and well-loved park. And again, because people are willing to put their blood, sweat, and blood, more blood because of all the cactus and so forth. You know, they're willing to put their time, their effort into that, and we have to honor that. So our commitment is going to be to Tucson Mountain Park. But then there's other areas that and this is the process we're going through. And if people have some ideas on, you know, on some of the filters that we can apply here, but areas, you know, trails, trailheads, you know, we want to make sure that buffalo grass and other invasives are not, you know, scraping against visitors as they're walking along trails, because that's just a pathway for moving invasives across the landscape. So we can envision that we use trails as something we want to protect. Really sensitive riparian areas, Cienega Creek Preserve, really Colossal Cave Mountain Park, those are areas that we focused on in the past. So I think you're going to see that. We're going to see less focus on the, I should have mentioned that a lot of the lands that you saw on that map are actually ranches. And we're not going to be focusing on ranches, in part because, well, their scale and where the remote location, but also because cattle do eat buffalo grass and can help us in a sense. It's a complicated answer in that regard, but they do eat buffalo grass. In fact, buffalo grass was brought here because it's forage for cows. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about.
I think there's a hand up. Keith, I think has a question.
Yeah, just a quick question. Brian and Matt, great job. My laptop actually crashed for the beginning of Brian's talk, so I probably missed this, but you're focused just on the grasses, or mesquite trees in the equation anywhere?
Say that. What was in the equation?
Mesquite. Oh,
mesquite. We are not focused on mesquite. Mesquite has invaded, if you will, semi-desert grasslands. That's probably where you're, you know, and we're not focusing on. We're really, you know, the scale of the invasives problem is so great that what we're really focusing on are species that are fundamentally changing structure and function of the native environment. So mesquite is changing it to some degree, but it's not changing the function. So buffalo grass is a great example of a species that has the potential to fundamentally change, you know, native structure and function. Fountain grass does, stinknet does. So that's where we're focusing our effort. And layman's love grass, I'll just say, a lot of people, you know, who know grass, seven desert grasslands in southern Arizona, layman's love grass is another one that has somewhat changed the structure and function, but it is so ubiquitous now. There's really no way that we can tackle layman's love grass.
Thanks, Brian. There's another question, another hand raised. I think Chris.
Hi. From your, I think your 8th slide, inventory distance mapping, were you creating the location polygons from the photos taken, like direction and angle of the captured photo?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, no, these were just they were not, no polygons were created based on photos. They were all using binoculars and getting good vantage points and actually being out in the field drawing those polygons. So crude it was, right? Because you're standing on a hill and you're looking across a valley, and you have to be able to, we had, multiple layers that we could click on. So we had topographic layers, we had aerial imagery that allowed us to be able to say, okay, well, yeah, that, what I'm looking at there is that outcrop, and then there's that outcrop over there. I'm going to draw a polygon here. And we did a couple times, and I felt pretty comfortable with that. And then of course there's a few times where we kind of, okay, well, we drew the polygon. Now let's walk over there, go all the way up that hill and sort of walk around the outside of that polygon. And of course it was, slightly wrong. What they say about models, that, all models are wrong and some are useful. And I think this one was both wrong and useful. But it gives us enough information to where we're going to say, if we're going to prioritize that area for treatment, that when we send out crews, we have a pretty good sense for where they would go. And once they're on the ground, they can collect different information about their treatments.
And I can add real quick too that we're starting to test out using drones to take care of some of the mapping and some of the reconnaissance. And I've started seeing some good success doing that too. So hoping, we can implement that in a more broader sense down the line.
Will you be using AI modeling to identify those patches through the drones?
That I'm not sure about the AI aspect of it. Elizabeth, if you know that?
Yeah, I mean, we're experimenting with, I guess, the supervised classifications and the object classifications, and those tend to work well on, patches we're familiar with that have similar ground cover. Like, I guess you couldn't do that for like wide, it doesn't really work well for a wide area, but a very localized area. We've had some success with that. Brian has seen, some of the results. So, and that's with imagery from the drone. It's RGB, red, green, blue, and with a vegetation index kind of sandwiched in. So we've had some success with that. So I think we're going to continue to try, and to go down remote sensing paths and using drone imagery. But that's experimental right now.
I have a question, Elizabeth. I wonder, I guess for all of you, have you thought about using the LiDAR data that was recently collected for Pima County? I know there's been some success in Wyoming using imagery and what you were speaking of as far as the classification, but to pair that with the LiDAR and include heights was really successful for identifying invasive species in Wyoming. And then they were able to target that to get rid of it more easily. So I just wonder if that's been any part of the discussion.
I mean, LiDAR data, yeah, we've been waiting for that LiDAR data. And if you could send that article, Jenna, I think that would, would help, because that would give us the height, right?
Right.
Well, yeah, no, that would be great.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And so, and that's served from, right, the AGIC website. Not AGIC, but
AZGO?
AZGO, yes.
Right. The DEMs are the actual point cloud.
Yeah.
Pima County should also have a copy, and if they don't, I have one, so I can share it.
Okay. We check with Steve.
Yeah. Yeah, if Pima County hasn't received theirs, then I can share what we have. But I just think it might be a really interesting way to address that. And I do have I have the articles written on what was done in Wyoming. I think I also have a recorded presentation, and I can introduce you to the people who did it.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know like hyperspectral is something that, that also has some promise.
Potential.
And I know that they take those data at down at Santa Rita Experimental Range. But I don't know about if anybody's looked at buffalo grass, because there is buffalo grass down on the experimental range. I don't know if they've been able to sort of tease that out. But I'd be interested to learn more.
Yeah, for sure. I think that there are some folks on the call that I guess play on the experimental range. They're part of the ARS folks, so they might have some insight. I don't know. Gerardo, do you know if they've been able to identify buffalo grass on the experimental range?
I am not sure about that, Jenna. I know
Okay.
that Guillermo Ponce Campos is working on the Santa Rita Experimental Range. There's been a mapping of 54 sites, I believe, drone imagery, and they're trying to distinguish vegetation there. He is using Google Earth Engine for that. So I think Guillermo will probably be a good connection to this. You might be interested in the work that he's doing right now there at that site. I can send you guys information. Hi, Brian, by the way.
Hey, good to see you.
I can send you guys contact information for Guillermo.
That
Great.
makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Gerardo.
Yeah, thanks, Gerardo. Yeah, Guillermo at ARS, or the watershed group. And then, you know, we've done some work, I guess, with cactus, with the hyperspectral imagery in the Santa Rita Experimental Range. So, but I'm not familiar with anyone that's, you know, that's done that for buffalo grass or invasives. But yeah, you know, we can check, right? Once we get the contact information, that would be great. There we go. Thank you, Gerardo. Okay. Any more questions, or? I think we went a little longer, Jenna.
I think that's great. The presentation was fantastic, and so was the conversation. So I think that's wonderful. Thank you for your time. We certainly appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, everybody.